Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Hi, my name is Marisol, and I wanted to share a story that happened to me years ago. I kind of got reminded about this experience because it's nearing Halloween, and this happened on that exact day. Every year, my mom let me take my little brother out to trick or treat while she stayed at home to hand out candy. That year, I was 16 and he was 10. He was obsessed with getting as much candy as possible, while I was more interested in hanging out with friends and pretending that I wasn't too old to be out there. Our neighborhood wasn't fancy at all, but it was safe and familiar. Most of the houses were spaced evenly apart. We had similar lawns, the same maple trees shedding orange leaves into the gutters. We had our usual route, and by the time that we reached the far end of our street, our bags were half full and our hands were numb from the cold. There was one house that we always skipped though, a small, pale gray place at the end of the cul-de-sac. There were no lights, no decorations, no sign of life. Even during the rest of the year, it looked empty. The curtains stayed closed, and the mailbox overflowed sometimes, and the yard never seemed to change. Nobody we knew had ever seen anyone come or go. I'd always been a little curious about it. It wasn't run down enough to be condemned, just looked like it was frozen in time. As we walked by, I remember saying something like we should dare each other to knock on the door. My brother immediately said no. He was always a little jumpy, especially when it came to stuff like that. But maybe because it was Halloween, or maybe because I wanted to mess with him a bit, I pushed him. I told him that it would be funny. I also added that I would give him a couple of my candy if he did it. He rolled his eyes and then went up the walkway while I stayed by the sidewalk. There weren't any lights on, but he still knocked. The sound echoed a bit, hollow, like the house was empty inside. That was what I was expecting. Of course, I knew it was empty, and ghosts aren't real. I just thought that it would be fun though. He turned back to me and then shrugged. But that's when we both heard the click of the deadbolt. The door opened just a few inches. I remember how wrong it looked, the way the darkness inside seemed heavy. Then the door creaked open wider, and someone stepped into the doorway. A man stepped out. He looked to be in his late 30s with messy hair, tired eyes, clothes that looked wrinkled and kind of dirty, like he had been wearing them for days. He looked surprised to see anyone there. He then said something to my brother. I couldn't make out all of it, but I heard him mention that he had run out of candy and had to go inside to get more. But he then motioned for my brother to come in and grab some with him. My stomach dropped. I don't know why. It wasn't like he looked dangerous exactly, but something about it felt wrong. It was too quiet. The house behind him looked completely dark, and I couldn't see anything past the doorway. I called out to my brother, telling him that it was fine and that we could just go since we already had a lot of candy. When the man heard me, he looked up sharply, like he hadn't realized anyone else was there. His whole expression changed in that second. He straightened up, blinked a few times, and then suddenly smiled. The kind of quick, forced smile people do when they're trying to look normal. He said that he'd actually just found a few more pieces of candy in the bowl after all, that he must have missed them earlier. He reached inside, grabbed a handful, and then held them out to my brother. My brother took them, mumbled a thank you, and then walked back toward me. The man just stood there, still smiling faintly, until we turned away. And then the door slammed. Yep, slammed, like he was mad or something. We didn't say much about it after. I just remember feeling weird, like I couldn't shake the image of his face. The way his smile appeared so suddenly, but seemed so fake once he knew that I was there. But I just tried to shrug it off. We still had a lot of houses to go to, and everything went fine for a while. Maybe around 30 to 40 minutes later, my mom called and said that she was coming to pick us up right away. I asked her why, and she just asked me where we were and told me to wait there. When she got there, she looked pale, so I pushed her to tell me what happened. She said that the police were in the neighborhood. Apparently, a few blocks over, a kid had been grabbed while trick-or-treating by himself and then dragged inside a house. Luckily, someone nearby heard the kid screaming and then ran over. But the man took off before they caught him, and the police were called. And the police had gone inside after the incident and confirmed that the house was abandoned. No furniture, no electricity, no signs that anyone had been living there, and the man was gone. I asked my mom which house, and that part made my stomach drop when she said the address. It was the same gray house. I remember just sitting in the car holding my candy bucket, feeling cold all over. I kept thinking about how calm he seemed when he asked my brother to come inside, and the way his face changed when he realized that my brother wasn't alone. I told my mom about what happened to us, and she asked if we remembered how the man looked. I said yes, and then she asked if we felt comfortable talking to the police about it. My brother nodded yes, so I just said yes too. Long story short, we were able to give our statements to the police. They noted it down, and then we went home after. It had been years since then, and the house is still there. The windows are boarded up now and no one's touched it. I don't really know if the guy was caught or not, but I genuinely hope that he has never succeeded in getting what he wanted. And parents, please, make sure your kids are not trick-or-treating alone. Stay safe out there. Halloween is always a big deal here. Not over the top, but just families putting out decorations, porch lights glowing, and kids darting from house to house in groups. Last year was our first Halloween with a Ring doorbell camera. I bought it mostly for package deliveries and peace of mind, not because I expected anything strange. It's funny, I never really thought about how much those cameras see until that night. Halloween went normally. We'd spent the early evening handing out candy to the little ones, the usual mix of princesses, superheroes, and homemade ghost costumes. And around 8, the crowd started thinning out. I turned off the porch light around 9, and I went to bed shortly after, and nothing felt out of the ordinary. The next morning, while having my coffee, I opened the Ring app just out of curiosity. I like watching the footage the day after, seeing all the kids' costumes, the way they run up excitedly, and the parents waiting at the sidewalk. It's really harmless fun. The first few clips were exactly that, groups of laughing kids, someone's inflatable T-Rex costume bumping into the camera, and a few neighbors that I recognized. And everything was fine. Until I noticed a recording that ran a little longer than usual. It was from around 8:42 p.m. At first, it looked like any other group. 3 kids in costume, 2 girls and a boy, maybe 12 or 13 years old. They walked up, grabbed some candy from the bowl that I had left out, waved toward the camera, and then left. But the motion sensor kept recording after they walked away, which meant something else had triggered it. And about 5 seconds later, a man appeared at the far edge of the frame. He was walking slowly down the street in the same direction as the kids. He wasn't wearing a costume, just dark clothes, maybe a hoodie or jacket. His head was slightly down, and he stayed in the shadows near the edge of the sidewalk. I remember thinking maybe he was a parent trying to keep a low profile, staying back while the kids went door to door, you know? Then something about his movement caught my attention. Every time a door opened, when another group of kids ahead went up to a house, he stopped walking and moved behind something. Once, he stepped behind a tree. Another time, he ducked behind a parked car. He would wait until the door closed again before continuing. It wasn't the kind of hesitation people do when they're just watching kids from a distance. It looked practiced, deliberate. The footage only showed a small stretch of the street, so he disappeared off screen after a few seconds. But now I was curious, or uneasy really. I scrolled through the rest of the recordings from that night, and the Ring camera catches motion every time someone comes within a certain range, so there were plenty to go through. Then, on the last clip that caught them, the kids reached the end of the street and they ran off toward the next block, laughing and one of them waving toward someone. The man paused at the corner for a long time just standing there, and then he turned and walked back the way he came. That was the last time he appeared on camera. I sat there for a while, just staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he really was someone's parent, but then why would he hide? Why follow so far behind? Why move like that? I didn't know who the kids were, not personally, but I recognized one of their costumes. A girl in a purple witch outfit. I'd seen her before walking a golden retriever on the weekends, and they lived a couple houses down. So later that day, I went over and I knocked on their door. I didn't want to sound too crazy, so I just said that I had some footage from the night before that they might want to see. The mom came to the door looking tired, and when I explained, her face changed. She said that the kids had mentioned feeling weird that night, that someone was walking behind them, but every time that they looked, no one was there. She said that they'd laughed it off, thinking that it was just nerves from the Halloween stories. She asked to see the footage, so I showed her on my phone. She didn't say much, just stared, pale, one hand over her mouth. And later that afternoon, I forwarded the clips to the local police. They took it seriously. I never heard much after that, just that they were looking into it. And a few weeks later, a cruiser drove slowly through our street a few nights in a row, but then things went quiet again. Sometimes, when I check the Ring app late at night, I think about that man. The way he moved, careful and quiet, just out of sight. It's strange how many times you can walk past people like that and never notice them. And every Halloween since then, I make sure to keep the porch light on longer. Not for candy, really. Just so the camera can see a little farther down the street. This happened a few years ago when I was around 14. I've never really told anyone the full story because it sounds like something that you would make up, but it's completely true. And even now, every Halloween, I think about it. My friends and I had outgrown the excitement a bit, but we still went out for trick-or-treating for fun, more to hang out than for the candy. That night, it was me, my younger cousin, and two of my neighbors. We started around 7, walking the same familiar route as always. The air was cold and smelled like damp leaves, and every so often, you would hear laughter or see flashes of flashlight beams from other groups a few blocks over. It was one of those normal Halloween nights that feel both lively and quiet at the same time. We had been walking for maybe an hour when I noticed a man under a streetlight behind us. At first, I didn't think anything of it. There were plenty of parents out that night, hanging back while their kids ran ahead. But what made me notice him was that he wasn't moving. He just stood there, watching the street. We turned the corner, and for a while I forgot about it. We were busy comparing candy and running up to porches with fake skeletons and glowing pumpkins. But when I looked back again, the man was there. This time, on the opposite side of the street, walking slowly, staying a good distance behind us. He wasn't close enough to be threatening, but it felt wrong. Every time we stopped at a house, he would slow down or stop completely. When we started walking again, he would start too. It went on like that for several blocks. I kept glancing back, pretending to adjust my bag, and every single time, he was there. Always in the background, never close enough to see clearly. Just a dark figure, hands in his pockets, keeping pace. We turned onto a quieter street with fewer lights. Most of the houses there were dark. No decorations, no porch lights. The only sound was the crunch of leaves under our shoes. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, though I didn't want to admit how nervous I was. And at one point, I stopped walking and I pretended to tie my shoe just to see what he would do. When I looked up, he had stopped too. He was standing by a tree, barely visible in the shadow. It was the way he stood, perfectly still, head slightly tilted, that made every instinct in me go cold. And that's when I knew for sure that he wasn't just another parent or neighbor. He was following us. We didn't talk about it though, but the mood changed immediately. We all seemed to pick up the pace without saying a word, and the laughter from earlier was gone. I also remember how quiet it was. No wind, no other kids nearby, just our footsteps speeding up. We then took a shortcut through a side street that looped back toward my house. There were more people around once we reached the main road again. Other trick-or-treaters, a few cars, and the normal noise was back. And when I looked back one last time, he wasn't there anymore. We went home after that, dumped our candy out on the floor, sorted through it, tried to act like nothing had happened. But then my cousin asked if I thought that he had been some random guy walking, and I said maybe. But the truth was, I couldn't shake how deliberate his movements had been. The next morning, I walked down one of the streets that we had been on, in daylight of course, and it looked harmless. Just a row of houses with the decorations still out and leaves piled in the gutters. I almost laughed at myself for being so tense the night before. Then, I noticed a single black glove lying on the sidewalk near where I'd last seen him standing. It was turned palm up, damp from the morning dew, and I stared at it for a while before walking away. I don't know if that glove was his, but for some reason, it reminded me of him. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted. Maybe it really was nothing. But the way he stopped every time that we stopped, how he always stayed just at the edge of the light, still makes me feel sick when I think about it. grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone kind of knew each other's business without meaning to. Every Halloween, the whole place came alive. Fake cobwebs, glowing pumpkins, and the smell of cheap fog machines hanging in the air. But the best house, without question, was the Gellers. Mr. and Mrs. Geller were the kind of old couple everyone liked. They didn't have kids or grandkids nearby, so they poured all their energy into Halloween. They would decorate their porch with string lights, a little skeleton band, and a fake graveyard that lit up at night. They were also known for handing out full-size candy bars, sometimes two if you complimented their decorations. Every year, they would wait outside in matching sweaters, smiling at everyone, asking what our costumes were. It became sort of a tradition to end our night there, saving the best for last. But the year this happened, I was 15, a little too old to be trick-or-treating, but my friends convinced me to tag along for nostalgia's sake. It was going to be our last year of doing it. It was me, my friend Lily, her younger brother, and another friend, Ryan. We were mostly walking around for the atmosphere, somewhere between wanting candy and pretending that we were too mature for it. When we reached the Geller Street, something felt off right away. Most houses had decorations or at least a porch light on, but theirs didn't. The curtains were drawn tight, and the little skeleton band that used to play tiny music was gone. I remember how weirdly quiet it was. Even the usual barking dog from the house next door wasn't making a sound. The Geller's porch light was off, so we figured that maybe they weren't participating this year, which was a bummer because again, they were the favorite among the trick-or-treating crowd. We were already walking past when I noticed a faint flicker from the light above their door. It was like the bulb was struggling to turn on. Flicker, pause, flicker again, until finally it stayed dimly lit. We stopped. I remember the four of us just standing there in that kind of awkward silence you get when something doesn't make sense. Then Ryan laughed under his breath and said something about maybe they'd just forgotten to turn it on earlier. I didn't really buy it, but I didn't say anything. We hesitated for a second before walking up the path. The lawn hadn't been mowed in a while, and some of the Halloween props, like a tombstone made of foam, was still lying on the grass, half buried in the leaves, like they'd been left out since last year. The closer we got, the stronger the smell of damp wood and old leaves became. When we reached the porch, I noticed the front door was slightly open, not wide, just a few inches, enough to see the faint glow of a lamp inside. I thought maybe they'd forgotten to close it, but it didn't feel like something that the Gellers would do. Yes, they were older now, but they were meticulous people. Before any of us could knock, the door creaked open a little more, and it was one of those moments where your brain can't quite decide if you're curious or scared. A man then stepped out. He was middle-aged, maybe in his 40s. He was wearing a dark sweater and jeans. He looked normal, I guess, but there was something strange about how he smiled, how it didn't reach his eyes. He said hello in this quiet, tired way, and for a second, I thought maybe he was a relative or something. He told us that the Gellers had moved away a few months ago. He said that they had gone to live with their daughter out of state. He even added a small laugh, like he knew how everyone missed them. I nodded, and then we said something polite and then started to leave. That's when Lily tugged my sleeve and whispered that she had seen something. She didn't say what at first. She just looked unsettled in this quiet way that I hadn't seen before. We started walking down the path again, But I turned back for one last look, and the man was still standing in the doorway watching us, not waving, not moving, just watching. And that's when I saw it. Pinned to what he was wearing near his collar was a small silver brooch shaped like a sunflower. I had seen it a lot of times before. Mrs. Keller wore it every Halloween. It caught the porch light when she leaned forward to drop candy into your bag. She'd once told me her husband gave it to her on their 40th anniversary. I froze. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make a scene, and honestly, part of me doubted myself. It could have been a coincidence, right? Maybe it wasn't the same one. Or maybe they gave that brooch to him before leaving. Maybe she forgot it in the house, he found it and then decided to use it. All are possibilities. But it's just that Mrs. Keller seemed to have really loved that brooch, so I doubt that she would give it away or leave it. We just walked home in silence, but I couldn't shake the image of that brooch. We didn't talk much after that. We finished our route and then went home. A few weeks later, my mom mentioned something while talking to a neighbor. She said that it was strange. The Geller's daughter had come by looking for them. Apparently, the couple hadn't answered any calls for months. Their house had been sold without warning, and no one had seen them leave. When the police checked, the sale paperwork turned out to be fake. The daughter filed a missing persons report. For a while, our neighborhood buzzed with rumors. Some people said that they must have gone traveling. Others said that they might have been scammed out of their house. But I couldn't stop thinking about that man and the brooch. One night, out of curiosity or maybe something darker, I walked past their house again. It was completely dark now, no curtains, no porch light, just empty windows staring out the street. As I passed, I noticed something near the front steps. A small, rusted metal sunflower, half buried in the dirt. I didn't touch it, and I haven't seen it again. I never saw that man again either. Sometimes on Halloween, when the streets are quiet and the air feels heavy, I still walk that way out of habit. Every so often, the porch light flickers on for a few seconds, then goes dark again. And every time it happens, I can't help but wonder if the Gellers ever really left, or if someone just didn't want anyone asking what happened to them. This encounter happened to me 3 years ago, during my sophomore year of college. I had parked at the parking lot on the south side of campus to meet up with my friends. We ended up having dinner and then all decided to walk down together to the north side of campus where there were a lot of college houses, and one of our friends was having a hangout. Mind you, this was October 30th and around midnight, and I had decided that I was tired and I wanted to go home. My friends ended up staying, and I had to walk all the way back to campus and across it to get to my car. Now, the campus is usually pretty well lit, and we have a lot of security patrolling late at night, so I wasn't too freaked out. I got to my car and then started driving out of the lot. The best way I can describe this was that there were 2 roads going opposite directions, a median, and trees or bushes on either side. I was driving along it when all of a sudden, 4 masked people hopped out from the bushes, 2 on either side, and then started going towards my car. At this point, I was shitting myself because the masks were the ones that you would see in The Purge and were absolutely terrifying. Thankfully, I was fast enough to lock my car doors before they got to me. They then started getting in front of my car, so I wasn't able to leave, and I was physically trapped in by their bodies and the bushes and trees on either side of me. And one of them walked to the side of my car door and one to the passenger's door, and then they started to try my door handles to presumably try and get in. When they realized that it was locked and that they couldn't get in, they started doing weird movements with their body, almost like they were doing a taunting and creepy dance. Two of them were still at the front of my car and then started getting on my hood. At this point, I was pretty close to shitting myself when by some miracle, another car pulled up behind me. When they saw that too, they immediately stopped, ran away towards the bushes, and I was able to drive away as fast as humanly possible. Thinking about it now, it was probably some dumbass college kids trying to have some Halloween fun. But I don't want to think about how far it would have gone if the other car didn't show up. Hey everyone, I'm 22 and male. This happened about 5 years ago when I was 17. Every Halloween, a group of us from my small town would have a bonfire out near the lake. It wasn't anything wild, just a bunch of kids sitting around with blankets, music, and way too much sugar. In our small town, there wasn't much to do really, so for it not to be too boring, we decided to do this one Halloween, and then it just became a tradition. The bonfire was about 1.5 miles from where most of us lived. It was down a long dirt road surrounded by woods. There's a shortcut that cuts through those woods, a narrow trail that eventually opens onto the neighborhood behind mine. I had been walking that trail since I was a kid. It's one of those places that feels safe during the day, familiar even, but completely different once the sun goes down. That night, my best friend and I decided to leave the bonfire around 11. It was cold and the fire had started to die down. People were drifting off in small groups, and we figured that we would take the shortcut to get home faster. We'd walked it dozens of times before, so it didn't seem like a big deal. And since there were two of us, it felt less creepy. The first part of the trail was just a dirt path covered in dead leaves. The trees were tall and close together, blocking out most of the moonlight. We had our phone flashlights out, but we didn't talk much. The woods were quiet, except for the crunching under our shoes. Every now and then, I would hear something small moving off the trail. A squirrel, maybe, or a raccoon. But it always stopped as soon as I turned my light that way. After a few minutes, we came to a small clearing about halfway through. That spot always made me uneasy for some reason, even in daylight. The trail splits for a bit before joining again, and there's this big old oak tree that leans at an angle like it's been trying to fall for years. As we were walking through the clearing, I noticed someone ahead of us on the other path, just a few yards away, almost at the bend. It looked like another one of our friends, a guy named Eric who had been at the bonfire earlier. He was tall and he was wearing this bright orange hoodie, the same one that I had seen him in that night. He didn't say anything, but he turned in motion like he wanted us to follow. It wasn't weird at first. I figured maybe he'd left earlier and then decided to wait for us. So we kept following and we kept walking. The path curved and the tree started getting thicker again. He stayed just far enough ahead that our lights barely caught him. Every few seconds, he would move out of sight and then appear again further up the trail. I remember thinking he was walking kind of strangely, like too stiffly, or like his head wasn't moving with the rest of his body. And after maybe a minute of that, something started to feel wrong. My friend slowed down, and I noticed she was pointing her flashlight toward the ground. She then asked me to shine mine too, and when I did, it hit the dirt just ahead of us. And that's when I noticed the tracks. They were shoe prints, but they weren't from sneakers. They looked more like boots, heavy ones like work boots or hiking boots. Eric had been wearing white sneakers all night. I remember that because they had been glowing from the firelight earlier, and then he joked about them getting dirty. The shape ahead of us kept moving forward, still wearing that same orange hoodie. I could feel my stomach drop. It was like the more that I looked, the less it made sense. The proportions seemed a little off. The arms looked longer, and the way it walked didn't look quite human anymore. We didn't say anything. We just turned around and started walking back the way we came. I remember trying not to run because the sound of running in the dark woods felt like it would attract attention. But every time that I looked back, my light caught flashes of orange between the trees, closer each time. When we finally saw the glow from the bonfire again through the trees, we started sprinting. A few people were still there packing up, and I didn't tell anyone what happened right away because honestly, it sounded crazy even in my own head. If my best friend wasn't there to witness it with me, I would for sure think that my mind was just playing tricks on me. The next morning, word spread that some of the parents and volunteers who helped organize the bonfire had gone out to clean up the area, and they found something a few hundred feet from the trailhead. Small piles of candy scattered in a perfect circle, not like drop candy, but neatly arranged on the ground in some kind of strange symbol, resembling a pentagram, with some kind of squiggle inside it, which was weird. But what really freaked out everyone was the animal that was nailed to the tree in the center of that circle. After that, we heard whispers of cult worship and a guessing game of who might have done it. But I can still picture that orange hoodie disappearing between the trees, and the way it moved. Too smooth, too silent. Eric had said that he had lost his orange hoodie that day, and had a few friends with him who confirmed that it wasn't him. So, who or whatever it was is still a mystery. I've never used that shortcut again after that day. Even driving past the entrance in daylight gives me this weird cold feeling, like something's still waiting there, just out of sight. When Emma and I bought the house, everyone told us we were lucky. A 3-bedroom place on a quiet street, big yard, low price. It was attached, but it was the kind of deal that makes you feel like you've just beaten the system. The real estate agent only hesitated once when I asked why it was so cheap. She said something about a tragic history, a child who had died there years ago after a long illness. But it's been renovated, she added quickly. Completely new flooring, new paint, you'd never even know. Well, I wish that were true. From the first night, something felt off. The air inside always seemed heavy, especially in the back bedroom, the smallest one. That was the room where it happened. We'd planned to make it a guest room, but Emma didn't like going near it, said it smelled strange even after we aired it out and scrubbed the walls. There was only one room we didn't touch, a back room which was locked. The realtor didn't have the keys for it, but said that she could get a locksmith in a few days to open it up for us. So after cleaning everything but there and unpacking, we decided to relax a bit and watch some TV. That's when we first started hearing things. It started with my wife. "Did you hear coughing?" she asked while we were watching TV. I shrugged it off and said, Probably the neighbors." But when we turned the volume down, the sound came again. Soft, wet, and close, like someone struggling to breathe through a pillow. It was coming from the back of the house. I tried to act brave, walking down the hall with the flashlight from my phone. Following the sounds, I traced it back to the locked door. I pressed my ear against it, struggling to identify what it could possibly be. So concerned if an animal might have gotten into there somehow. I grabbed a hammer and a chisel, and I took the door hinges off. A simple, yet non-destructive way to get into the room without having to wait for the locksmith. As the door opened, I was hit with stale air, smelling of cough syrup, and inside was a small bedroom, furnished with a bed, desk, and a lamp, as well as a stool behind the bed. But that was about it. The sound of coughing was gone, so I put the door back on the hinges, and I tried to relax afterwards, but found it difficult to do so. After that, the house changed. The air smelled faintly of medicine, the sweet chemical smell hospitals have, and Emma started waking up in the middle of the night gasping for air. Said her chest felt tight. Sometimes, I'd wake to find her sitting up in bed, staring toward the open door, frozen in fear. She told me that she had seen someone standing there. "A little boy," she whispered. "He doesn't move. He just watches." And that's when it became clear. This house wasn't safe. We tried everything. Sage, candles, prayers, even sleeping with the lights on. Nothing helped. The nights got worse and the air colder. And always, that sound of coughing, dragging, whispering from down the hall, dusty footprints leading out from that room toward our bedroom. They seemed to become more frequent the harder we tried to get rid of it. And one night, I woke up to see that Emma wasn't beside me. I found her standing in the doorway of the small bedroom that we had kept locked ever since. But now the door was wide open, the lights flickering. She was whispering softly to someone that I couldn't see. "Baby, what are you doing?" I asked. She turned slowly. Her face was pale and her eyes wet and unfocused. "He is sick," she said softly. "He needs me." I stepped forward and the room grew colder. My breath turned white in the air, and I swear I heard another voice, faint, rasping, like a child trying to speak through phlegm. "Stay." Then the door shut behind me. I dashed forward, grabbed my wife who went limp in my arms. As I grabbed her, the light bulb shattered. I pulled her towards the door only to find it closed shut. Setting her down, I slammed myself against the wooden door until finally it gave way. I dragged Emma out of the room and I slammed the door shut behind me, putting the lock back on again. We slept in the car that night, engine running just to have some noise. And we moved out the next week. Didn't even bother to sell it first, just left the keys on the counter and drove until we didn't recognize the street names anymore. But sometimes though, I still hear her coughing in her sleep. And when I wake her, she mutters, half dreaming, "He just needed someone to take care of him." Last year, I threw a Halloween party at my place. Nothing huge, just about 20 people I invited, mostly friends from work and a few neighbors. I had decorated the living room with those cheap fake cobwebs and orange string lights, some candles, and some plastic pumpkins. The playlist was mostly old horror movie themes and random 80s stuff. It was one of those nights that felt more cozy than wild, since I didn't like those kinds of parties. Anyway, people came dressed as the usual things: witches, vampires, and a few lazy sheep ghosts. I was dressed as a scarecrow, which mostly just meant flannel, straw, and face paint. At around 9, more people started showing up. Some I knew well, others were friends of friends that I didn't really talk to, which wasn't unusual. It wasn't until maybe an hour later that I noticed the plague doctor. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing a long black coat that looked a little too real for a costume, and the mask, one of those bird-like beak masks, was made of thick, cracked leather. It had a kind of old worn look to it, like something that had actually been used back in the day. At first, I assumed he was with someone. I personally invited around 20, but I wasn't strict if anybody brought or invited some more. I just remember seeing him standing near the kitchen counter, holding a cup, and just observing. Not dancing, not talking much, just quietly watching people. It didn't stand out as creepy at that time. There's always that one person at every party who doesn't really mingle. But what I do remember is that he seemed to drift around without ever staying in one place for long. I would see him in the hallway when I went to grab more drinks, then again by the back door, then sitting on the couch near a group of people that I didn't know that well. Every time that I looked, he was somewhere different. By the end of the night, when people started heading out, I realized that I hadn't actually spoken to him once. I assumed that he'd left with someone, so I didn't think much of it. The next day, when I was cleaning up, I started asking around in our group chat who the plague doctor was. Everyone gave the same answer. They thought that I had invited him. One friend even said that she thought he was a relative of mine, which made no sense to me. Another person said that they assumed that he came with someone else entirely. It was strange, but it wasn't like anything bad had happened, and I know that sometimes happens on Halloween parties. It happened in a lot of parties during my uni time, so I shrugged it off, and I didn't think too much about it. Maybe it was someone's date who didn't stick around. About a week later, I came home from work, and I saw something sitting on my porch. I couldn't make out what it was until I completely got out of my car. It was a mask. The same black leather beak mask that the guy had been wearing. It was old looking, cracked along the lines, the same exact one that I had seen the guy wearing. I thought maybe someone had left it as a joke, until I turned it over. Inside, scratched into the inner lining, was my name. Just my first name and nothing else. I don't have any explanation for it. None of my friends admitted to leaving it there, and I threw the mask away that same night. It just doesn't make any sense, really. For what purpose would the guy do that? To be creepy? Edgy? To leave a message? But like, what message? And after a week? Why wait that long? I'm sorry. I have so many questions, because I just don't understand. If anyone has any idea or theory, please let me know in the comments. Those are very welcome. And just a note, I'm not planning on throwing a Halloween party this year. I was feeling unsure as I signed the waiver. It was 3 pages long, way longer than any haunted house waiver should be. It mentioned emotional distress and exposure to realistic depictions of death. The only thing that was guaranteed was that the actors would not touch us. Erin laughed when she saw my face. "Come on, it's all part of the experience," she said, bumping my shoulder. So I signed it alongside the rest of the group. There were 4 of us in total. Me, my best friend Erin, her boyfriend Tom, and his friend Nate, a self-proclaimed veteran when it came to haunted houses. The place was called the Hollow Maze, a traveling haunted attraction that popped up every Halloween. They set up shop in a local abandoned building or something similar, but it had a great review. This year, it was an old textile factory just outside of town. So, on a Saturday night after work late October, we all got in Erin's car and drove out there for the scare of our lives. The parking lot was a makeshift area in front of the building, mostly dirt and a bit of gravel. The pathway forward was illuminated by strings of orange lights that buzzed above us, flickering like dying candles. Beyond them, a massive black tarp covered the entrance, flapping in the wind, and we could already hear screaming from inside as we approached. At the entrance, there was a man in a dingy, slightly off-putting clown suit, complete with a mask, standing there beside a sign that said, "Tickets, please." So we handed our tickets to the clown, but he didn't speak. He just tilted his head toward the entrance. The first thing I noticed was the smell. As soon as we stopped inside, the air turned thick, humid, and metallic like rust. There was fog, flashing red lights, and the distant hum of machinery. The first few rooms were harmless enough. Animatronic corpses twitching on wires, fake blood sprayed across the walls, actors jumping out from behind curtains. We laughed and we screamed, clinging to each other. "This isn't even scary," Nate bragged. I could tell he was trying to act tough, as a few rooms ago, he was screaming his lungs out with the rest of us. And when Tom pointed it out, he got super defensive and told him to shut up bashfully. Everything felt like harmless fun for a while. But then the atmosphere changed. The music faded. The sound effects got quieter. The next section of the building had small walls going in different directions, all dark and rather ominous looking. "That's why they call it Hollow Maze, I guess?" Erin mused while standing at the fork in the hall. "So, which way?" And after a bit of discussion, we decided to go right. We pressed deeper into the maze, passing through a narrow passage lit by a single swinging bulb. Somewhere ahead, we heard faint muffled crying. "Okay, that's actually creepy," Erin whispered. The path split two once more. A glowing sign said Ward A with an arrow pointing to the right, and Ward B with an arrow pointing to the left. "Ward A?" I suggested, not sure which path to take. "We should split up and look for clues, gang," Nate said immediately, doing his best Fred impression from Scooby-Doo. We all laughed, probably harder than we should have, but it was better to laugh than to be scared. Tom, continuing the joke, said that he was down to split up if it meant he could have alone time with Erin. And after a bit of more banter, the group actually did decide to go separate ways, stupidly. Erin and Tom went left, and Nate and I went right. Our hallway looked like an old asylum wing, white tiles cracked underfoot, lights buzzing above. Some of the patients were in cells, reaching through the bars, whispering nonsense, and others sat motionless on the beds, twitching, just enough to make you doubt if they were mannequins or people. At one point, as we continued down the maze, we passed the door slightly ajar with "staff only" scrawled across it in marker. Inside was a folding chair, a mug, a jacket hanging from a hook. There was no fog machine, no props, just dust and silence. "They probably used this on break," Nate said, stepping inside. "Let's not," I started. "Relax," he grinned. "We're supposed to explore. Besides, why would it be open and in plain view if we weren't supposed to see it?" But then, somewhere behind us, a woman screamed. Not a playful jump scare scream, a blood-curdling one. And it sounded like Erin. We ran back into the hallway shouting their names. Nothing, only echoes. The fog grew thicker, the lights dimmer. I turned one corner and then another, but the path had changed. The maze had rearranged itself for some reason. And that's when we saw him. He was standing at the end of the corridor, half in shadow, tall, broad-shouldered. His mask wasn't glossy plastic like the others. It looked old, cracked and worn, with a jagged mouth slit too wide. His clothes didn't match any of the costumes, just jeans and a heavy coat stained with something dark. He didn't move, didn't speak, and just stared. "Nice costume," Nate called, voice shaky. "Where'd you get that? Goodwill?" No answer. The man tilted his head, slow, deliberate, and then he started walking towards us. At first, I thought it was part of the act, until I noticed the thing in his hand. A knife, long, dull silver, with a red liquid on it. Not rubber, not foam. This knife was real. The sound it made when it scraped against the wall froze me in place. Hey man, you're not supposed to," Nate said, taking a step back. But then the man broke into a run. We bolted. I don't remember the order of rooms, only the chaos. Strobe lights, screaming actors, props crashing down as we shoved through. I screamed for help, but everyone thought that we were part of the show. And at one point, I looked over my shoulder. He was still following, his knife glinting in the red light. Not fast, but steady, always just a few steps behind. We burst through a black curtain and stumbled into a pitch-black corridor. My heart hammered so loud that I couldn't even hear Nate guiding me to the exit, which, in my panic, I didn't see. He had to forcefully pull me towards it. Then, the lights flickered on, just for a second, enough to see that we weren't alone. He was standing right behind us. I didn't think, I just ran. He didn't chase after us. He just watched as we fled out of the building. I hit a door hard enough to throw it open, and cold air hit my face. The outside air. I tumbled onto the gravel behind the building, screaming for help until my throat burned. Security found us a few minutes later. I told them about the man, the knife, the mask. And they assured us all props were fake and every actor had to check in before the show. They did a head count. Every employee was accounted for. Except for one. He was a no-show, which was surprising because when they were tracking attendance, they had a full roster. According to them, a man had walked in before opening already wearing a mask, saying that he was part of the show. No one questioned him since he had an ID card on, which the police later confirmed was fake. And they never found him. They searched the entire building for him, had all the walls and props taken down, but the man was nowhere to be found. The police did, however, find a hidden crawl space behind one of the walls, filled with tools, stained rags, and a pile of old clothes that didn't belong to any staff member. But what was much worse was the 3 bodies in that room, 2 of which were later to be identified as the girl that I knew since grade 7, who I considered to be a sister, and her boyfriend of 2 years. That was 2 years ago. Sometimes, if the air's just damp enough, I swear I can still smell that faint metallic tang like rust and blood. And when I close my eyes, I still hear the faint screams of what I know now were Aaron's final moments. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night and it's silent, I still hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, the way his were, and I will never stop feeling scared. Hey, so I have been debating whether or not to post this, but it's been eating at me for a year now, and with Halloween coming up again, I just can't stop thinking about it. Last year, I was home alone on Halloween night. My neighborhood usually gets a decent amount of trick-or-treaters, so I had my porch light on and a big bowl of candy ready. Nothing out of the ordinary, a few cute costumes, polite thank yous, the usual. By around 10:30, the street was quiet and I was about to call it a night when I saw a small group of kids walk up, 4 of them, all around 10 or 11. They were laughing and comparing candy. Behind them though, standing just outside the light of my porch, was someone else. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing a dark hoodie and one of those cheap blank Halloween masks. The kind that's just a flat white face with tiny black eye holes and a slit for the mouth. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just stood there. I figured he was a dad keeping an eye on his kids. It's late after all. But after the kids left, he didn't go with them, and he just stood there, still as ever, facing my house. I waved awkwardly, which got him to finally move down the street. With the last of the kids gone, I turned off the porch light and then went inside. I told myself that he was probably just some teenager that's being weird. A few hours later, maybe around 1 a.m., I woke up to a noise downstairs. At first, I thought it was my cat, but looking at the foot of my bed, Nala was sleeping on top of my mini fridge like she always does. I listened again, closer this time, hearing some kind of thuds, before a loud crashing sound, which seemed to come from downstairs. What's going on? I had a security system, so I got up to flick on the light and check it out, but the power seemed to be out. I then heard more crashing downstairs. I froze, realizing how bad of a situation this might be. I grabbed my phone and then I called 911. The dispatcher picked up almost immediately, and upon me telling her about my situation, she told me to lock my bedroom door and stay quiet, and that the officers were on their way. As I hid under the bed, the dispatcher told me to stay on the line. While I was on the phone, I heard it. Slow, heavy footsteps moving around downstairs, drawers opening, things clattering onto the floor, and faint grunts of effort as whoever it was looked through my house. Then, the footsteps started coming up the stairs. Every creak felt like it was right under my feet. I could hear the sound of the wood under the weight of someone who shouldn't have been here. I could hear doors opening, more sounds of ransacking, before systematically getting closer and closer. And then, the doorknob to my room jiggled, twice. A slow, testing twist, and then it stopped. Whoever it was didn't try to force it open, just walked away, and I heard them rummaging in the other rooms, the guest room, maybe the bathroom, and then silence. The cops arrived maybe 10 minutes later, but it felt like an hour. They searched the house, found the back door open, lock broken, no sign of anyone, and the place was ransacked. Mostly expensive small items missing, jewelry, some cash, my Switch, things that were easy to grab and go. I had a small camera on the porch, so the next morning I checked the footage. The power was cut, so I only have the footage from before that. But what it showed horrified me. The man in the white mask was there. After the last group of kids left, he didn't walk away like I thought. He stepped into my yard, just stood at the edge of my porch, staring at the door. He looked around my house, and upon finding the power line to my home, cut it. That was around 11 p.m. The break-in was at nearly 2 hours after that, meaning that he had sat there for 2 hours in the cold October night, just waiting, plotting, preparing. The police found the guy about 2 weeks later, but unfortunately, they couldn't recover any of the things that he stole. Most likely sold them to make a quick buck. I still live in that house. I got new locks, more cameras, and a motion sensor light for the yard. I keep my valuables all in my room, and I lock my door before I go to sleep now. Because if I hadn't locked the door that night, who knows what could have happened.
This is something I experienced back in college, 2002. My roommate and I were driving home late from a Halloween party in the next town over. It was around midnight. We were on the back roads fighting the fog, and the whole drive we just sort of scanned the radio. We were wired on caffeine and sugar, trying not to fall asleep, so we started playing this dumb thing that we made up called the radio station game. One person would scroll through the FM stations, and whatever we landed on, the other had to make up a story about it. It started as a way to stay awake, but it got creepy, fast. Late-night radio is full of weird preachers, old country songs, and talk show hosts that sound like they're whispering straight into your brain. Anyway, we were scanning through, getting bursts of static and half songs when we land on something different. It's a voice, not singing, not music, just talking. It's kind of quiet and buried under some static. But my roommate leans in and says, "Hold on, go back." So I do. We turn it up a little, trying to make out what it's saying, and that's when we realize it's describing us. Two women, early 20s, driving east on Highway 14, red Honda Civic. They've just left a Halloween party. We both just sort of laughed, awkwardly, assuming it was a prank or some sort of weird coincidence. I mean, what are the chances? But then the voice keeps going, steady and calm. They don't believe what they're hearing. The air in the car suddenly feels freezing. My roommate turned the volume down halfway, but the voice just kept talking, the static pulsing between words. They think they can turn this off, that they can stop it. I remember my hand hovering over the knob. My roommate slammed it first, shutting the radio off entirely. We sat there in silence for a few seconds, both breathing way too hard. But then we started laughing, because what else do you do in that situation? I said something like, "Guess we found the world's creepiest DJ," trying to make it sound normal. But maybe 10, 15 seconds later, the radio turned on by itself. Same station, same static, but the voice was gone. Just white noise. I reached for the dial, and that's when it happened. A scream tore through the speakers. It wasn't a sound effect or feedback, this was a real scream. It started low, and then pitched up into something raw, like someone being hurt. And then it just stopped. Cut clean off, mid-breath. The stereo was off. No power, no lights on the console. But the sound was still ringing in the car and echoing off the glass. We pulled over on the shoulder, sat there for maybe a full minute, not saying a word. My roommate finally reached over and unplugged the stereo fuse from the dash. We drove the rest of the way in silence, the kind where you can actually hear your pulse. The next day we tried to find the same station, every frequency, every stretch of static. There was nothing. No trace of that voice. No broadcast in that range. Anyway, it's been over 20 years, and I've driven that same stretch of highway dozens of times. Never turned the radio on. Not when I'm alone.
It was Halloween night in Shibuya. If you've seen the news reports or been there in person, then you will know about the huge gatherings of people in fancy dress costumes. Maybe not this year, I guess. I want to tell you about the scariest thing that ever happened to me, back in 2017. I'm a female, and my friends and I decided that we would go to Shibuya in costume. We saw hundreds of others gathered around the famous crossing, all dressed up too. The October air was full of enthusiasm for the holiday. Shibuya was rammed. So many people were there. As we walked across the crossing, I smelled sweat, alcohol, and my feet were trampled on over and over. There was garbage everywhere. I was regretting coming at this point. The oncoming crowd pushed past me, and it separated me from my friends. I started searching for them as best I could, but when everyone's wearing masks and costumes, it's difficult. Everyone was drunk and just stumbling around, and I didn't stand a chance of finding them. I decided to find a less crowded area, and there I would text or call them. Before I knew it, I was down an empty back alley. Perfect, no one around. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down and compose myself. I was pretty annoyed at the situation. I could still hear the noise coming from the crossing area. A shabby man ambled towards me and sat down close by. Had he been there the whole time? I wondered. I couldn't figure out if he was in a costume or what he was supposed to be. He kind of looked like a shaman or something. He had long greasy hair and his face was gaunt. I looked closer and it honestly looked like he was wearing bits of costume he found on the street. Some parts were like a witch costume, bright polka dot tights and a witch's hat. Other parts looked like a clown's costume. Very weird. Nothing about this costume matched at all. "Give me some candy," he said as he stared at me. I ignored him and tried to walk past him. Then he did something unexpected. He shot up to his feet and grabbed hold of my arm. He blocked my path and said again, "Give me some candy." I couldn't move. I tried to wriggle free from his grasp. "Give me some candy." He slurred the words. He sounded in a daze. It was truly horrifying. I didn't know what else to do, so I just rooted through my bag, looking for something to give him. "Haven't you heard of trick or treat? You don't want a trick, do you?" he slurred. It was at this point I noticed when he pulled his hand out of the pocket of his hoodie. Something was in his hand. He had a knife. I didn't know if it was a toy knife or not, but I didn't want to find out. Sweat was running down my face.
Are you choosing trick?
He chuckled. He repeated it again and again. I was still blindly searching in my bag for some candy when I saw someone dressed as a police officer. I screamed for help at the officer. He looked my way and walked down the alley towards us. The weird guy who had hold of me just stared at the oncoming officer. I'm saved, I thought, as he walked over.
What's the matter, miss?
He called as he approached.
Are you not giving this man his candy?
He said with a smile. He pulled his gun from his side holster and aimed it at my head.
Trick or treat?
He grinned. I have never felt so helpless in my life, so betrayed, so alone. I felt as if it was the end for me. I didn't know what to do. There was no one around but everyone in earshot. They'd never hear me if I screamed, or they'd never even hear the sound of the gun. I was still absent-mindedly rooting through my bag when my finger touched on something which felt like a candy wrapper, just as the policeman approached me and put his hand on my wrist. I flung it out of my bag onto the floor. They both let go of me and scrabbled around on the floor to reach the candy. I ran as fast as I could back to the crowd of people, and eventually I was reunited with my friends. I have no idea what happened that night, who those people were, if it was a prank or if it was a real thing. Either way, it was horrible. I really do hope it was a prank. I was invited to Halloween in Shibuya the next year, and of course, I politely declined. Just because there are many people around in the center of a city, it doesn't mean that it's safe. Please take care out there, guys.
This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My younger brother and I were home alone since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party, and they had tasked us with handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. This really bummed me and my brother out because we had made plans to go trick-or-treating with our friends too. A lot of people stopped by our house, and by 10 p.m., almost all the candy was gone, and my brother and I decided that we'd eat the rest. We were just sitting on the couch watching a scary movie and stuffing ourselves with candy when there was a knock at the door. So I stormed off the couch, wondering who the hell could be knocking at our door this late. I assumed it was just some late-night trick-or-treaters. Even if that was the case though, I had turned the porch light and Halloween decorations off, which should have been a dead giveaway that we were out of candy or that we weren't home. So I assumed that it was my parents. Being cautious though, I looked through the peephole and I saw a suspicious man standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with a hood over his head, which made it difficult to see his face, and the only details of his face that I could spot was that he had a beard and dry, crusty lips. There was no way that this guy was a trick-or-treater because he wasn't even wearing a costume and he was far too old to be trick-or-treating. His hands were stuffed in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he also looked very thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There was no way in hell that I was going to open the door. Still looking through the peephole, I watched as he knocked on the door again. He seemed desperate for us to open the door, and he was shaking a bit. But it wasn't cold outside, definitely not cold enough for someone to be trembling. He was giving me a bad vibe, and I just wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're out of candy!" I shouted. I watched as a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Are you alone in there?" The man asked, almost in a mocking voice. His voice was raspy and dry, and my younger brother asked me if he should call the police, gripping his cell phone. The man let out a low grumble and said, Sounds like you're not alone in there. I continued to watch him through the peephole, and his hands were still wedged tightly into his pocket and he was still shaking a bit. And I began to wonder if he was armed. I decided to take action and spoke to him in the most intimidating voice that I could. "Get the fuck away from my house or I will call the police." His smile faded and he bared his teeth. His teeth were piss yellow, and I concluded that he was probably some homeless crackhead. He had a look of fury plastered on his face. Fortunately, he left without trying to break in, probably because he knew that I wasn't fucking around with him. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole until I saw that he was completely off our property. My brother and I breathed a sigh of relief and decided not to call the police. We were a bit paranoid about this, but we just watched TV until our parents came home. We didn't really tell them about the man since he hadn't really tried to harm us. But now when I look back to this, I wish that we had called the police because maybe we would have been able to prevent the murder. You see, the next day, we found out that the elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor had found her lying on her front porch, and she had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck, and my brother and I immediately knew who had done it. We told the police what we knew, but they couldn't do much from the information that we had given them since we hadn't seen many details of his face. They went on the hunt for the man, but they never caught him. I blame myself for that poor old lady's murder because I could have prevented it from happening just by calling the police. I think the most disturbing thing of all of this is the fact that he didn't take anything from the lady's house. Her house had been left untouched. But he could have gone in and taken what he wanted since her door was wide open. This meant that he just wanted to kill, and that was his only intention. He didn't want money or jewelry. He only had the urge to murder.
I'll tell you my scariest story. I've had creepy experiences, religious experiences, and supernatural experiences, which I will stand by as being something otherworldly. This Ouija one isn't necessarily one of them, but it's not bullshit, and I don't have a great explanation. Halloween 2 years ago, me and a buddy decided to do something fun. We got the car, and I told him I really wanted to try a Ouija board. We went to Walmart, a game shop, Target. No boards. Finally, we get to a bookstore and search the whole game aisle, which was very small. We asked if they had any in the back, and the guy said he'd check. He comes back with nothing but says, "Wait, I think I saw one here." We check the shelves again, just for the hell of it. And there one is. We definitely checked the whole aisle, but honestly, this kind of thing happens a lot. So probably nothing supernatural. Just us not seeing it. We made jokes about how it appeared and we got the last one. We kept jokingly saying the night was meant for us. We took my car down to the woods. This place I know like the back of my hand. It was where I played as a kid and kind of my sanctuary. Me and my bros would jog or drink there sometimes. It was pitch black, so we didn't go all the way in and set up the board. We wanted to stay in the shadows, as a girl recently died on the tracks that ran through the woods when she was drunk and got caught under the train. My buddy Red received a call from a close friend of mine and his, as she had a fight with her boyfriend. Me and the other kid, Glenn, decided to get started. I was jokingly carving sigils and stuff into trees, and some other symbols I knew from an occult book I'd recently read, which, in hindsight, was probably stupid. But most were harmless sigils, just meant to open up the other side. I started using the board maybe 15 feet from Red, who was on his phone and hadn't moved. We asked some questions and got mostly gibberish and the usual. Mostly, it barely moved. We kind of thought, damn, Ouija shit doesn't work. But Glenn was really into science and was saying, it'll definitely work, but it's not spirits, it's just subconscious muscles. I was cool with that, just wanted to get something. After a couple of tries, we said, F it, let's go back to my place or cruise around. But Red had just ended the call and said he wanted one try at it. So I said we'd do it. At this point, it started getting weird. Red was pretty serious. If anything, the biggest joker there was me, and I can tell you that I wasn't pranking anyone that night. He walked over to the board, and we noticed the little triangle was gone. We had had it seconds before and looked around the busted picnic table we had used, and it was nowhere. A minute or two of searching led us to finding it, 15 feet away, where Red was sitting. He hadn't touched it at all that night, and he was the only one over there. Since we arrived, it had been me and Glenn on the table, and Red 15 feet away. Till Red walked to the table, no one was over there, leading us to think, how could it get all the way over there when it was here seconds before? I kind of shrugged it off, and maybe thought one of the guys had somehow snuck it over. But that's pretty unrealistic, unless they threw it when my back was turned, and neither of them seemed like they would. This really had no effect on us, and after a minute, we continued. Me and Red did the board. We asked about the mutual friend's relationship, something like, will they stay broken up? And got the letters H-E-L with our eyes closed. Glenn would tell us when it had stopped, as well as the letter he saw. He also later assured us neither of the two of us had our eyes opened. We went for another letter. At this point, I thought, and later Red tells me he thought I was doing the same thing, that he was purposely controlling it to spell hell yes, as in they definitely would break up as a joke. We got to the last one, and it really wasn't on a letter. It was kinda on cue, so we decided it was just another jumbled up word. Well, then we both realized it was also half on P, so we all kinda got it at the same time. Help. We all totally freaked out. Like that feeling something is wrong and total dread. We grabbed all our stuff. Sometime in the night, I believe at this time, I grabbed a key from the table, thinking it was one of the guys. I don't believe it was there when we arrived, but I can't be totally sure about this either. I pushed it all in my pocket and ran. The rest of the night went fine, and we were all kinds of spooked. I told them maybe it was the girl that was hit by the train. As it happened, maybe a couple 100 yards from us very recently, and she was doing the same shit we were doing that night. About a week later, I wore the same flannel again. In the top pocket was the key. Realizing it wasn't one of the guys, I posted it on our group chat with the picture. Whose key? Everyone said it wasn't theirs. I was sitting next to Red later and double-checked it wasn't his. He was kind of spooked by the Ouija board, and I kept saying it was the ghost key, just to mess with him. I said I was going to leave it in his class to haunt the teacher. It was kind of a joke, as the teacher was kinda a weird dude, but also cause I didn't need the key. Might as well toss it. Red watched me toss the key into the trash. This was the teacher's last class of the day, and there was one more class till school was out. We went to the final class, and then when the bell rang, I left to the top floor, which held only the choir room. I was going to chill with Red till he was done there, so I could get a ride home. The teacher was a super religious Polish dude. When I walked in, we hung out and the teacher was tossing something up and down. I asked him what it was. He showed me a key. I made a joke to Red that it was the ghost key, but he actually looked at it and commented that it was the same size and color with a similar backing. We had the photo in the group chat, and he later pulled it up. The grooves matched perfectly, and the scuffs too. At this point, the Polish teacher asked what was happening, and Red told him. He was super pissy because it was a Catholic school, and hearing us with a Ouija board was basically like telling him that we loved Satan. I asked where he got it, because I thought Red gave it to him. He was dead serious, not joking anymore. It appeared to me. We kept asking what he meant, and he just kept saying, "It appeared to me." That freaked us out, and I told Red to come clean, assuming he asked the teacher to open the room to grab the key. Something I don't see him doing, but it was the only logical explanation. Red was more freaked out than me. The teacher lost his shit on us and wouldn't give it back to me. I wanted to dump it in holy water or something. Later that day, he went to his church and had the key blessed, burned, then buried. I got yelled at by 2 teachers, and Red no longer wanted to mess with Ouija boards or talk about anything like that. I put away the Ouija board and used it once since, but nothing ever happened again. On graduation day, I talked to him about it, and he alluded that something more happened. I asked what happened with the key, and he said something like, "Well, I took it in and the priest tried to burn it, blessed it, and rid it of evil, but..." And then, when I asked what the but was, he wouldn't tell me. Maybe he just slipped up. Maybe something happened. Red never admitted it, even though I don't know how he would, and Glenn was told about it after the key was burned. I don't know what happened, and won't claim it was definitely paranormal, but there is definitely no explanation I can come up with.
Ever since I first saw this house, I knew I wanted to own it and live there someday. It was my dream home, overlooking one of the local rivers, and would have had an incredible view. I was on a river tour on a historic boat, listening while the tour guide talked about the interesting places in the local area that were worth seeing, especially along the shoreline. There were historical houses from when the area was first settled, some of the old military buildings, and other things I wasn't really interested in. I sat up the top, taking in the afternoon sun and away from other people, spending more time focused on the scenery, and I was only half listening. I saw it among several trees, peeking out, and my eye was instantly drawn to it. I remembered seeing a picture of it when I was a child, and even back then, I wanted to go to the house and own it someday. It was a 2-story house with white faded paint and a large balcony that overlooked the river. It had broken windows and clearly had seen better days, with vandals going in to damage the property, at least from what I could see from the outside. The tour guide said it had been owned by a wealthy landowner who died through mysterious circumstances, and ruin followed the family, even when they tried to escape. He also added that the local legend said it was haunted, and anyone who tried to purchase the home ended up losing everything. That the house had ended up claiming multiple people's lives. It all sounded interesting, and other people asked if there were ghost tours available. He said no, for the safety of the guests, and then the topic moved on to another feature. The rest of the tour was relatively boring. When the tour ended, I went back home. I, however, never forgot about the house and decided I need to learn more about it. I started researching the house and found some YouTube videos about it, even older posts on dead forums that discussed all the different theories. I tried to find it on Google Maps. I had to change the year in order to find it, going all the way back to 2008, when the house was in reasonable condition, and it was still visible from the road. It looked to be abandoned here too, In 2012, it looked like there had been renovations that had been started, but for whatever reason, they were never completed. The bricks and other materials left there were later stolen. I worked out the address and I won't share here for, well, your safety. I don't want you or anyone else to get hurt. I searched for it again online and found sites talking about the rumored history. Apparently murders and other perverse crimes happened here. However, there were no police reports or any newspaper articles about it. All gossip. I didn't think it was fair for such a beautiful home to fall into ruin. I contacted the council to see who owned the property and if they were willing to have me buy it. I discovered the owner lived overseas and had never even visited the property. She inherited it from a wealthy relative and was waiting for the local area to become more marketable in order to get the best price. However, dealing with the many issues the house brought was annoying at best. The end result was I received a decent price to take it. I was given a week to make a decision and given permission to visit the property. The driveway was non-existent, and the closer I got to the house, the fantasy of fixing it up was fading fast, with the estimate cost of it all. When the real estate agent opened the garage door, we found copper thieves had stolen the wiring out of the walls, and any leftover furniture had been trashed. Graffiti coated the walls, and the estate agent told me that the bones of the house were still solid. As I walked through, I realized the cost was adding up, far more than what I could afford, but I still wanted to go through the house. Questionable rooms with a bathroom. Inside the shower, it was filled with a variety of dead animals, some fresh and other skeletons. The tiling scraped from their claws as they tried to escape. I don't know how they ended up in there. The pair of us coughed, and the agent forgot himself, hilariously, even slipped into a rough accent and caught himself on. The kitchen, you could tell it was beautiful when it was new, had all the cupboards ripped out, and vines had grown up through the drainage pipes. I climbed the beautiful staircase. The wooden beams hadn't been polished for so long, yet it retained its splendor. I nearly forgot everything else when I went up. All the other rooms were filled with broken bed frames, the vanities and chest of drawers open with nothing inside them. As I walked on the creaky floor, I wondered whether I would be able to handle all of this. All the doors had been left open, except for one. At the end of the hallway was a closed door, and I had a weird feeling when I got closer to it. It was sharply cold, and I asked the agent if he knew what the room was. He told me it was probably a bedroom. He was pale and couldn't stand still. Clearly didn't want to be there anymore. I opened the door, and to my surprise this room was different. It was a child's bedroom. Clean. The wallpaper wasn't damaged by graffiti or the elements. The bedding looked fresh, covered in teddy bears and other stuffed animals, while porcelain dolls rested on the shelves. There was no dust anywhere, and the carpet was clean. By the large bay window was a rocking chair, with a pillow on it, looking out at the river while another boat was floating by. I asked if someone had been living here, or if there was a squatter. Without it, why was this room so intact? There was also the terrifying thought of, why would a squatter have a kid's room prepared? The agent and I kept looking around the room for any clues. He stood near dolls and looked at them. I think he was frightened, and I opened up the bedside table drawer. There was a book closed with a lock, a gold chain with a locket, and a small bouquet of dried flowers. I picked up the diary. I remembered having one just like it when I was young, and I managed to get into the lock. I remember having one just like it when I was young, and I was able to break the lock. Maybe this was owned by the last resident. I saw a shadow coming in from the doorway, and thought the real estate agent was getting ready to leave. I called out, "Just a minute." I flicked through the pages, and the handwriting was beautiful, cursive, and as I kept going, The handwriting was becoming more erratic and aggressive the more I turned. "I hate them" was repeated all over the pages. It didn't change until I reached the final one. In jagged, black lettering it said, "Kill." The room felt cold, and I asked the agent if he opened a window, and if he felt the cold too. No reply. I turned around and noticed he was gone. I didn't want to be left alone here. I kept the open book in my hand and walked out back through the back door. I had a feeling I wasn't alone, but no one was there. I called out the estate agent's name and received no response. I looked out the window and saw both of our cars still there, so I knew he hadn't left. I went down the creaking stairs and saw water puddles on the floor that had come from the outside. Maybe another animal had gotten in? The trail suddenly ended with no reason, and I stood close by. I remembered the stories, especially how the house attracted death. I saw the agent walk through the scrub in the direction of the river. He didn't look back when I called out to him, and nor did he pause. He kept walking down until he reached the water's edge. I expected him to stop, but instead he walked straight into the water. Nothing slowed him down. I saw bubbles where his head would have been under the water, and finally, they stopped. He gave no sign he was going to do this, no warning, nor any sign he was having trouble in life. I took out my phone and called the emergency hotline. It connected then dropped, so I tried it again, and the same thing happened. I walked back to the house and called. This time it wouldn't connect at all. I heard faint laughter coming from the dark hallways, and it felt like whoever this was coming closer. I didn't want to be pestered by a squatter or a homeless person, but I have to admit, it didn't feel like any of those. I left and went to sit in my car, feeling slightly safer in there. I tried calling again, and debated just leaving the scene altogether, when I saw shadow figures walking past the windows. What frightened me was when one turned to look directly at me, and instantly I felt sick. I drove down the street and finally felt like I could breathe. The call finally connected. I waited while the police arrived on the scene, along with an ambulance, although it was too late for him. He was already dead. Since it was fresh, they were able to retrieve his body, and when they checked his messages, nothing gave any warning about what he intended on doing. I told them what happened, and soon my story only added to the local legends about the place. Forums had photos taken by urban explorers that showed the infamous child's bedroom, and I was able to watch it degrade until someone came in and vandalized it. The graffiti covered the walls, and someone set it on fire, leaving black ash all over the room. As you can guess, I never bought the house, and when I called the owner to apologize and tell her what happened, she didn't sound surprised, shocked, or angry. She simply said, "I knew you weren't going to buy it," and hung up. I haven't been able to stop thinking about the house and what could have been. As far as I knew, what happened to the real estate agent was the only death ever reported there. I haven't wanted to go back, but the curiosity has always remained. I've been scared to share my story because it might encourage some people to go there. I don't know if the shadow figures were bad entities trying to cause problems, or the ghosts of people who had died there. I still don't know what the laughter was, and I never want to hear it again. Sometimes late at night, I can hear that creepy laughter and feel like I'm being watched. And I wonder about whatever it was in that house, because I think it followed me home.
Hey everyone, this is your creepy sister. Thank you so much for watching the video. I do hope you enjoyed it. Also, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. It really helps the channel out. A big shout out to both my channel members and Patreon members. Thank you so much for taking your support to the next level. You guys are great. And again, to everyone, stay scared, because your fear feeds me.